Sonic the Hedgehog 3 is a good movie. I feel comfortable saying that. It achieved almost everything I wanted it to. The brotherhood and camaraderie between Sonic, Tails, and Knuckles made them feel more alive and real than ever. Jim Carrey's I've a Robotnik got an unexpected but poignant send-off. They managed to get the human characters to slot in and play a role without derailing everything again.
Mostly.
And almost every grievance I had with Sonic Adventure 2's story and the Paramount Sonic universe in general was addressed. Unfortunately, some of the moments and things I liked from the original SA2 storyline got axed, but I can live with it. I can understand that the movie only had the ability to accomplish so much in 110 minutes. As much as the child in me would have loved to have seen Rouge and Amy play major roles on the big screen right then and there, I can live with the movie as is, because they absolutely nailed Shadow the Hedgehog. Sure, they took a lot of liberties with his arc and backstory, but somehow all of it just works. I've spent the past few months attempting to peel back the layers on this new interpretation of my favorite Sonic character, and every time I do, I only gain more respect for everyone involved. I'm in awe. For the first time in a long while, Shadow feels three-dimensional again. And I'd be lying if I said this film didn't bring a few tears from my eye because of his journey. He might just end up being the best incarnation of the character if they keep this up. It really all depends on how they end up handling Team Dark and the Black Arms in any future installment. So here's to hoping they nail them as well. Sonic 3 was well worth the almost 3-year wait after that post-credit scene. Sure, there were a few bumps here and there, and Sonic Movie 2 has been effectively retconned into oblivion, lol. But ultimately, I can't wait to see where the stories of Sonic and Shadow go next. And the best part of all of it
Is that it washed the terrible taste left in my mouth from just a few months prior.
Hi, I'm Idith, a poorly drawn stick figure that reviews media that's on par in quality. Now I know what you're thinking. Didn't you already make this video critiquing Dark Beginnings Episode 1? And the answer is technically yes, but I'm redoing and updating all of my Dark Beginnings coverage because I admittedly didn't love how those turned out. I generally prefer to work at my own pace, so I ended up making many unnoticed mistakes just so I could finish before the game came out. And then the game came out and gave me the full context for the storyline, thus proving that I was wrong about everything. Because it turns out things weren't as bad as they seem. You know, because they were actually a million times worse than I could have possibly imagined. So for those who have already watched those videos, you should still watch these new ones because I'm overhauling my Dark Beginnings review script almost entirely from scratch to be more punchy, concise, overall better quality, to address some corrections and responses I got on those previous videos, and to address things I flat out overlooked because there was a lot. Oh boy. Now, let it be known that I do not hate watch/play anything, much less if I intend to review it for the channel. I go into everything with the benefit of the doubt. So if I had decided beforehand that I was not going to enjoy Sonic Cross Shadow Generations, I wouldn't have spent $50 of my own money to pre-order a day one copy. And just so you're aware, this is not going to be a review of Sonic Cross Shadow Generations in the traditional sense. Nor do I plan on making one of those. I'll let people more skilled at critiquing gameplay handle that part. And that's because the game part of the game is fine. It's fine. And at its worst, it is at least better than Frontiers. What this is going to be is a critique of Shadow Gens as a narrative experience. And trust me when I say it will only be half as pretentious as that sounds. That's because media analysis and writing are my main specialities, and because Shadow Generation's story happens to be its most gaping flaw. But no, I'm wrong on this apparently, because the fans have proclaimed this storyline as returned to form, a masterpiece. Those who were believers love it, those who were skeptical thought it was at least decent, and all proclaimed it as a step in the right direction. Now, is it possible for so many people to be completely wrong about the same thing? Before I answer my own question, I'd like to make a distinction here. Whether or not you like a thing is entirely unrelated to its subjective quality. If you liked the story and felt all the feels, good for you, because I didn't. This story made me feel nothing but apathy, frustration, and disappointment. And the reason for that is because, and I'm not gonna sugarcoat anything, the storyline is bad, and all of you are on crazy easy pill. The point of these essays will be to focus on the writing quality of Shadow Gems, its tie-in material, how well it stands on its own as a piece of narrative storytelling, and how all of it slots into the pre-established Sonic canon. And the short answer to all of that is not very. We will go through every scene and almost every line of dialogue chronologically, like the long fan I am, and completely dissect them and explain why none of it works or makes any sense, and why all of it failed to make me feel any of the things it wanted me to feel. And yes, because we are leaving no stone unturned, that means we're going to be here quite a while. Also, each character of note will get their own aside where I will analyze the characterization in depth and explain why they don't work as continuations of their prior selves, nor on their own merits, completely divorced from any of their past appearances. And in addition, sometimes these asides will center around world building elements, franchise history, stages and mechanics, or on specific plot points and narrative devices when warranted. Of course, you are free to disagree with any of my points and arguments and counter them in the comments below. As always on this channel, I do read every comment and welcome debate. And for your convenience, I will have these videos organized into chapters separated by topic. And I'll put an addendum at the start of any upcoming parts when necessary. Also, while having a cursory knowledge of the Sonic the Hedgehog franchise and the stories of Sonic Adventure 2, Sonic Heroes, Shadow the Hedgehog, Sonic 06, Sonic Generations,
And Sonic Frontiers
would be helpful to understanding the arguments I make in these videos, it is not required because unlike Shadow Generations, I will make an actual attempt to make my work accessible to normal, well-adjusted people. And it goes without saying, don't harass anyone!
That's no good.
So with that little disclaimer out of the way, Ian Flynn is the sole credited writer for the entire Shadow Gens enterprise. Now, that can't possibly be the case. A storyline this nonsensical, poorly structured, self-contradictory, and infuriating only happens when there are too many mutually exclusive cooks in the kitchen. And I like him! He isn't that bad of a writer. Right? Unless he is the sole writer, and every writing choice stopped with him, which, if that's the case, I make no secret that I have problems with Sonic franchise de facto head writer Ian Flynn. Too many problems. But it is important to note that I used to like him, and I still really enjoy his early work on pre-reboot Archie Sonic. That run of that comic was a huge inspiration for my own creative work, and I even like some of his work on reboot Archie. But his work lately has been... Where do I even start? Now, before any of you get the wrong idea, I will preemptively say this. We will not be discussing, speculating, nor asserting things about Mr. Flynn's personal character, or his politics, and that's because I find such discussions to be a complete distraction. I don't particularly care what the people who make the things I consume believe or think, as long as what they make is good. And ultimately, whether or not I like Ian as a person, or agree on his various statements on whatever, is irrelevant to the question of if the storytelling of Shadow Generations is of any quality or merit. I should also establish something necessary in order to properly dissect the story, and that is the difference between scenario design and script writing, because they are generally two very different things one shouldn't get mixed up. Generally, how these things work is the game or franchise director has an idea for what the game is going to be, and that includes the mechanics, basic premise, and level themes. This is scenario design. And someone else, or sometimes the same guy, is tasked to write the actual scripts for the dialogue and cinematics. The reason why this is the case is because the game devs need to know what to dev and can't afford to waste time. Scenario design is done first so that both the game devs and the script writer can work in parallel and the game comes out on time. This means that not everything in the story, good or bad, is Ian's fault. He didn't choose to make a tie-in to Generations, nor did he conceive the Doom powers, or the inclusion of Gerald and Maria, and as we go along, I will make sure to make the proper assumptions as to which terrible decision is the fault of which party, because believe it or not, sometimes Sonic Team can ruin the franchise too. I guess my ultimate point for this entire series will be that if Ian Flynn and everyone else involved have to stick around, then I just want them to lock the flip in and write good Sonic stories again. I was, up until I suffered through this storyline, completely obsessed with this franchise and its characters, world, stories, and themes. And I would much rather have all those aforementioned things not suck in the future or retroactively be ruined. All I want is for Sonic to live up to its potential. But if we all refuse to criticize this franchise, especially when it comes to Ian, then don't expect it to ever improve. Because my goodness, I can't pretend anymore that the state everything is in now is anything but flipping dire. But in general, during these videos, I promise to give credit to Ian and co. whenever it's due. Case in point, Professor Gerald's journal. That thing is good. Well, actually, mostly fine. It has a handful of problems and oversights that we'll get to eventually, but overall, it's the best thing to come out of the storytelling component of Shadow Generations. And unfortunately, that's not saying much. And for those of you familiar with my and overly long critique of Lightyear series will know that a staple of it was the very revealing director's commentary that I spliced in at relevant points. Now, Shadow Gens doesn't have a director's commentary, but I have the next best thing, because Ian Flynn has a podcast that exists for the sole purpose of giving him an avenue to tell on himself. And he made an entire episode for the Bumblecast about his work for Shadow Gens that will be very useful ammunition for me, and you can easily find and watch it on YouTube yourself to verify the fact that I don't take any of the excerpts out of context, because I really don't need to. Again, I stress, don't go there to harass anyone. But you know what? That's enough preamble. I have to rip this band-aid off eventually and actually talk about this insulting embarrassment of a so-called storyline. So with all that out of the way, Dark Beginnings was quite terrible. Changed my mind.
We had a lot of back and forth on the script early on, just making everything fit in that time limit, finding the right amount of lore to put in there, because part of the objective of this animation as a prelude was to reintroduce Shadow and his really complicated backstory. How do you do something that is so intricate and dense when your focus of the project is high stakes action? So finding that happy medium was tricky. It was also funny seeing the final product where it's like, okay, we went back and we revised this scene so many times to really cram it full of story element stuff, and the final product just whittled it down to what we had like on an initial pass where it was much more streamlined. It's like, well, so it goes. Part of it is you learn as you actually storyboard it out and put it in there. So seeing the final product versus the script is interesting in comparison.
Yeah, that definitely explains a lot. Chapter 1.
Aurora Borealis.
We begin our spiral into madness on the space colony arc 50 years ago. And we know this because this helpful piece of text tells us. Aw, isn't that nice and helpful? I sure hope it's not lying to our flipping faces, because that would be rude and unnecessary. We see Maria and Shadow running down a corridor in a hurry. Are they being chased by Gun? Well, no, because as we soon find out, Maria is actually dragging Shadow to the observation deck to see the Aurora Borealis. And this is practically the only time I will give Ian credit for being clever, and I really wish it wasn't the last. Maria then tells Shadow what the Aurora Borealis is, and given how Shadow simply calls them
lights,
indication is that Shadow doesn't know what they are, thus justifying Maria explaining it to him. This is the bare minimum for justifying exposition, and the only reason I'm pointing it out is because Ian will proceed to do a cool trick from this point onward called forgetting how to do this very thing and never doing it again. But because Maria overexerted herself, dragging Shadow here in a hurry, she faints from exhaustion. Shadow notices immediately and rushes to catch her. Now, as we soon find out, Maria is sick with a terminal illness that hinders her physical ability. This is an element of Sonic lore that has been given the shaft up until recently, to put it mildly. Something censorship, I guess? So this is a big moment for this part of the backstory to be integrated into a piece of mainstream canon. And given that the concurrently released movie decided to omit this element, there are fans new and old who must have this explained to them in some way. Now, there are plenty of intelligent ways of writing dialogue to convey this information.
The low gravity here only keeps your condition in remission. You should know better than to exert yourself.
Yeah, this is clunky. This line of dialogue kind of makes Shadow sound like an emotionless robot whose job is to explain things to the audience when in universe he's supposed to be skull. This exchange actually has a few problems I completely missed my first time through, to come to think of it. Maria's line is the first problem.
Thank you. I just pushed it a little, that's all.
The fact that she's apologetic and self-aware means that we completely kill any chance for conflict between our main characters before it could start. It would have been better if she had simply thanked Shadow for catching her without acknowledging her own carelessness, only to have Shadow respond by saying, Maria, you know you're not supposed to push yourself. You know you're ill, so you can't keep doing stuff like this, my goodness. Heck, if they put in my suggested line, it would flow nicely into the next one.
I know, you're right. But when it comes to the beauty of the earth, I can't help myself.
Up until now, in the Sonic canon, our impression of Shadow and Maria was only that of happy fun time stargazing, whoopsie-doodle, grandfather reduced the polarity of the water boys, and bang. The fact all of this is backstory means that this corner of the Sonic universe is woefully underdeveloped by nature. Sure, a lot of documented stuff happens, but the details and nuances on who Maria was and what her relationship with Shadow was actually like were up to interpretation. And given that this story is going to use time travel as the excuse to put Shadow's backstory into the front story, this opens itself up to be the opportunity to fix this oversight. And just so you know now, what Ian and co have done with the backstory and Maria's character is somewhat of a mixed bag, to put it very mildly. Given that these two are pretty much siblings, it would have been nice to at least suggest that they had their occasional conflicts, like siblings often do, as I've been told. But whatever, this one flawed exchange isn't the end of the world. Then Maria says this.
I can't wait for the day when we can finally return.
Now, I found this particular line to be fantastic due to its subtlety. We. At first I found this one word I saw it. Shadow has never been to Earth before, and Maria knows this. You can't exactly return to a place you've never been. So what does Maria mean when she says this? Well, she means she can't wait to be back on Earth to go to the place she calls home. The obvious indication being that her saying we isn't her misspeaking, but her deliberately including Shadow. She wants him to see Earth, the place he's never been to, as his home too. However, due to reasons that will become clear shortly, the cleverness of this line was absolutely an accident. Because from this point onward, characters will only ever say exactly what they mean without any ambiguity or room for interpretation. And right on cue, like flipping clockwork.
I was created here. I don't know if there's a place for me on Earth.
So, this is, Shadow wouldn't say this. In fact, he would say the opposite of this.
マリア、僕には見つからない。僕が生まれた理由。僕は何のために生まれ、何をすればいいのか。いつか、あの星に行けば、それが見つかるんだろうか。
I don't know what's going on. Why does Shadow say the opposite of what he would say? What he did say? What is even the purpose of this line? Actually, you know what? Let's put a pin in this for now and leave it at Ian, you better not be doing what I think you're doing. And this happens.
Professor Gerald made me the ultimate life form. I should be the key to all manner of medicines, curing you.
Where do I even begin with this line? I don't know if I'll ever be able to feel at home down there. Anyway.
I have angst about not being able to help you with your sickness!
Exposition is not an inherently bad thing. When your story has a lot of ground to cover and a lot of foreign concepts the audience has to wrap their heads around, you inevitably have to explain all of it in some comprehensible fashion. But there is justified exposition, and then there's having your characters blurt out exposition randomly and in fine specific detail when they're supposed to be overcome with extreme emotion. And to top it all off, we go from one topic and non-sequitur ourselves into a completely different one.
I was created here. I don't know if there's a place for me on Earth. Professor Gerald made me the ultimate life form. I should be the key to all manner of medicines, curing you.
Just so you know, I did not edit that clip whatsoever. Shadow really does change the subject on a dime that quickly, and it is immensely jarring and confusing. It's times like these that make me really wonder if the writer of whatever I'm watching has ever had an actual conversation with a real human being before, because this is not how people talk. In my original coverage of this episode, I speculated that Dark Beginnings was thrown to a chop shop by Sega in order to incentivize the PS5 pre-orders, mostly because they advertised the fact that the PS5 copies would include the Peter Jackson extended editions of Dark Beginnings, and my assumption turned out to be not quite on the money. There's like one extra scene that's added that's fully produced. All the other extended scenes are storyboard animatics. But don't worry, we'll address all of those after we finish talking about episode 3. And as part of this, I assumed this non sequitur was a casualty of locking extended scenes behind a paywall, because that was the best faith thing I could say about Ian Flynn's writing ability in response to this blatant and immersion-breaking non sequitur of an exposition dump. As it turns out now, no, the extended version of the scene and dialogue is practically identical. Non sequitur and all. Fantastic. Although if I were to give the benefit of the doubt again and steelman this, maybe the studio cut down the scene from Ian's script and the OG script had better connective tissue. But we don't have that original script to look at now, do we? So as of now, that's just baseless speculation. Wait a minute. How did Shadow know that he was created by Gerald for the express purpose of curing Maria?
マリア、僕には見つからない。僕が生まれた理由。僕は何のために生まれ、何をすればいいのか。
I thought it was obvious that Gerald kept that information from Shadow to keep him focused and not burden him.
And also because censorship.
Because otherwise this SA2 flashback has Shadow saying words that aren't true and don't mean anything. The detail that Shadow didn't know why he was created is something that we as fans seem to forget for some reason, admittedly including me sometimes. And you would think that lore master / superfan Ian Flynn would do the proper flipping bare minimum amount of research for this project, but let's just put a pin in this too. After Shadow's sudden, and I do mean sudden, outburst, Maria consoles him. She tells him not to beat himself up and that he and Gerald are doing their best to research the cure for her illness. I don't really have a snarky comment for this one, because this dialogue is fine. Okay, so we're doing something new this time. Yes, I am copying random film talk because I like him, and the strategy is good. So whenever I finish talking about a scene, I am going to write down all the character traits that we learn about all the characters, and this will help make finding discrepancies, a bit more apparent. It helps us keep track of things. Alright, so first off, Shadow. Actually, I should specify the flashbacks because for reasons that I'll explain later. Is young and naive, cares about Maria, has angst about not being able to help Maria's sickness, does not think there is a place for him on Earth, randomly gets angry all the sudden without explanation. Okay, Maria likes science stuff, cares about Shadow, and wants to show him the world, despite them being locked up in a space cage. Not a criticism, by the way. That's just objectively one of her traits. Is sometimes careless. Doesn't want Shadow to burden and beat himself up. Thinks Shadow and Gerald are doing their best. Oh yeah, and she really likes the Earth. Chapter 2.
It's Emerlin time.
Then some random robot shows up, blows a hole through the space colony Ark, assaults Gerald Robotnik because reasons, fights Shadow, and the action sneaks so cool! Then the robot disappears and is never mentioned again. So, where do I begin with this? Now, before anyone tries to correct me, yes, I know who Emerald is, but who Emerald is, nor anything about him, is important to the story of Shadow Generations or Dark Beginnings at all. So, why is he here?
Oh, silly idiot! Have you forgotten that Emerald is the thing from the thing? And that means you're supposed to turn your brain off and feel all warm and fuzzy inside. Because it's the Gizoid from Sonic Battle!
Oh. Hello, Hypothetical. I see you've returned. And yes, I did know all that.
He's dead, by the way. Emerald's story was told and completed all the way back in 2000 flipping far. So why are we sullying his memory 20 years later by turning him into a one-dimensional boss fight inside of Shadow's dreams? Oh, and yeah. Everything up until now has been inside Shadow's head while he's dreaming. Probably should have mentioned that. Don't worry, I'll get to discussing that part of this framing device, believe you me.
But Emerald was on the Ark during this time period. This makes perfect sense. And didn't you see the cool lights and flashy choreography? So why are you complaining? Just shut up and consume product.
Look, Hypothetical, I know you're trying, but
have you not considered that the cool lights and flashy choreography are part of the problem? The takeaway from this fight is, holy crap, this is really awesome! But that kind of detracts from the tone and atmosphere the prologue has been trying to build, I think. The prologue before this moment and after it is about Shadow being sad that his family are gone. So having a strange random tangent about finding a robot that just so happened to be on the Ark at that time, despite the fact these two never actually fought each other apparently, and despite Emerald having very little to do with the fact that he lost his family, is very distracting from the point and a waste of screen time, because this never comes up nor becomes relevant again. Now, forgive my relative ignorance, but most of my exposure to Emerald is from Sonic X, because Sonic Battle is one of the few Sonic games in my backlog that I haven't played past the first 15 minutes of, nor have I watched all the cutscenes, so I have fairly little knowledge of the specific nuances of the relationship between Shadow and Emerald, other than they were on the Ark together over 50 years ago, and that Shadow feared Emerald would go berserk in the present day, and it was in conflict with Sonic and his buddies about how to deal with the Gizoid. Maybe Shadow and Emerald have a specific and special relationship that would motivate Shadow dreaming about him. Maybe he regrets not being able to save him at the end of Sonic Battle, just like he regrets not being able to save Maria, but I wouldn't know anything about that, because Dark Beginnings doesn't see Emerald as his own character with a backstory and relationship with Shadow, but only sees him as a vehicle for a sudden, tangential, inexplicable, nostalgia-fueled, flashy action sequence. And because all of this is happening in a dream, the fact that Emerald was on the Ark during this era is irrelevant. This could have been Sonic Shadow was fighting, or Eggman, or Flipping Big the Cat, and this sequence would have made the same amount of sense because it is a dream. And those characters have just as much to do with the day Maria died as Emerald does. Keynote, from Shadow's point of view, or by the logic that the thing he fights has to be something that was on the Ark, it could have been an army of water boys, or the bio lizard, or the gun soldiers that killed Maria. Wait a minute, I just realized something. If this dream sequence is supposed to convey how Shadow is sad because his family are dead and killed by gun officers, then why isn't this an action sequence of Shadow fighting the gun soldiers that killed Maria? That would solve the entire problem. Emerald doesn't even need to be here for the episode to have a flashy action sequence where Shadow fights a thing for the thing we know. Oh wait, I know the reason why it wasn't written that way, and that's because it would make sense and be narratively interesting, and those things aren't allowed anymore. Yes, Ian, Emerald is indeed a thing from the thing that I know, but you can't just blindly pander to my nostalgias and expect me to shut up and not ask any questions about your incoherent and unfocused storytelling decisions.
You know, you read what others had done.
Wait, I don't think we're ready for that clip yet. No, look, the hypothetical is gone. Again. I'm used to this. He disappears all the time. So now that I'm done complaining about Emerald, for now, we can now talk about the lead up to the fight. Shadow and Maria witness the explosion, Shadow gets ready for action, and Emerald uses a teleport dash and flies to the Ark, causing even more explodies.
That robot was heading towards Grandfather's lab.
Wait, what? How can you tell that it was a robot from that far away? And how can you possibly know where he's headed? Sorry, I forgot this is a dream, and therefore nothing that happens needs to make any sense. Then Maria pleads with Shadow to save Gerald. She grabs his hand, and Shadow hallucinates a bunch of gun soldiers with Jinx scratches all over them. And this is prompted by... Sorry, I forgot this is a dream sequence. Therefore, cause and effect do not matter, and I should just shut up and enjoy the ride.
I'll handle this. Just wait here. I'll be back, I promise.
Shadow then rockets off to fight the random robot that randomly showed up and randomly decided to attack Professor Gerald because cause and effect do not matter, because it is a dream, you see. It doesn't need to make sense, and I'm trusting this particular point for no reason whatsoever. Shadow and Emerald fight, Shadow Wiener, Emerald becomes Shatter Glass, hoorah! Okay, so Shadow is willing to fight to protect those he cares about, and Maria has really good eyesight because she can tell a speck in the distance is a robot. I just think that's really funny, okay? It doesn't really matter because it's not real. It's flashback, or actually, you know what? Dream. Just to clarify that these aren't the actual characters, because of course, that's gonna be its whole own another tangent. Chapter 3. The gunships is arrived! The dreamscape then deteriorates, and Shadow comments on how none of this is right, because clearly all the nonsense he just went through wasn't enough of a dead giveaway that he was in a dream. Sure, fine, I'll accept this. Then this happens.
This is the Guardian Units of Nations. Prepare to be boarded.
The soldiers, they storm the Ark, destroy all evidence, but it's too soon. It's happening too quickly.
Now, Shadow, to this point, has had 9 lines, and 4 of them are clunky, unprompted exposition because Ian has never heard of the phrase show don't tell, apparently. Well, okay, that's unfair. 5 of Shadow's lines have been natural and explicable, 1 line has been explicable yet clunky exposition, and the remaining 3 lines are unprompted and clunky exposition. The problem with this line is that it only has one purpose, a meta purpose, to explain things to the audience. And that's bad, because good exposition should be explicable in universe as well as outside it. Shadow is alone. He has no one who needs this explained to them. He is in his own dream. There is nothing prompting him to say this out loud. Oh, sorry, I forgot this is a dream, and that means that cause and effect do not matter. But, you know, why show the audience that the gun soldiers storm the Ark and destroy all evidence of something? Wait a minute, Shadow's line doesn't even explain what evidence was destroyed or why.
Let's just put a pin in this too.
But if we really had to tell the audience that the soldiers stormed the Ark and destroy all evidence, then just have the PA guy say,
This is G.U.N. You will come quietly with all your research in hand.
and then we see Shadow visibly confused and panicking. Because need I remind you, this is a visual medium where not everything needs to be stated aloud with no room for nuance or ambiguity. But whatever, it's not like how one handles the small things is at all representative of how they handle the large and important things. But do I? What? Why do random things keep happening unprompted? I'm sorry, I keep forgetting that cause and effect don't matter because this is a dream. But in all seriousness, the fact that Gun just randomly shows up now, despite never being brought up or mentioned before, outside of one sudden, unprompted, blink and you'll miss it flash of forward back, is very jarring. We could have slowly built up the tension, terror, and dread that these soldiers brought into Shadow's life and climaxed everything with the horror of Maria's death. But there's only 5 minutes of this episode, you see? And it's not like we spent the previous 30% of the runtime on irrelevant nonsense or anything!
Are you beginning to understand why cramming Emerald into this episode for no reason other than the nostalgia was a mistake?
Also, I guess we now have confirmation that what we're watching is a sequence of unreliable and jumbled up events that have no bearing on what actually happened. Good to know, especially because we know Shadow's memory can get a bit screwy at times. So, we have now established that these dreams are unreliable and do not have any bearing on what actually happened. And I'm repeating myself for no reason whatsoever. Then the gravity gets so tilted at them towers, and Shadow falls through the shattered glass and into the black void of lost despair. Loves to blatantly exposit things unprompted. Chapter 4.
Feel my loss and despair.
Shadow stumbles upon Professor Gerald chained up to a chair in a cell, about to be executed by firing squad. We then see glitched up flashes of Gerald inaudibly yelling about his revenge as the firing squad prepares to fire. I guess I have to give them props for that. They actually showed that scene and even had them use realistic weapons and pull the trigger, which is more than I ever thought they'd do. I mean, we don't hear or see the gunshot and we immediately cut away from the glitch, but still, gotta give them props where it's due. They usually shy further away from things like this. Shadow then recovers from the flash and reaches toward the professor, but as he walks toward him, Gerald glitches a room away, and then another. And another. He drifts further and further away. As he drifts farther and farther away, Shadow desperately sprints towards his father figure, scurrying faster and faster, pushing himself harder and harder. He reaches out, but it's too late. Does Shadow blame himself for Gerald's loss in sanity and death? Man, I didn't think this prologue was going to inspire me to ask such a heavy question.
Seeing the nightmare sequence rendered that way was really satisfying, because that was pretty much as I envisioned, especially that bit where he lands in the prison cell. And as he tries to reach Gerald, Gerald just keeps getting further and further and further away. I'm pretty sure I've had a nightmare like that. That was rendered perfectly.
Man, this is actually pretty cool. I can't wait to see Shadow's feelings toward and opinions about Gerald develop later in the story. Ian, this will be expanded upon, right? You're not just gonna drop this, right? Oh, am I kidding? This is Sonic Team and Ian flipping Flynn. Of course this idea gets instantly dropped because this is a series of cool visuals and not a piece of actual storytelling. Moving on. Shadow then finds himself in a stormy void, surrounded by the tattered ruins of his world around him. And then he hears something. Lightning flashes, and we see Maria running as a silhouetted premonition in the clouds. Then, gunfire. She shatters into pieces like glass, because we haven't gotten our fill of shattered glass imagery yet. Seriously, this is the third one within a minute. As a nice detail, the origin of the cracks is where she was shot, because symbolism.
Just ignore that she was shot in the other shoulder.
Wait, why is Maria's death shown after Gerald's? That just gives off that impression that Gerald went insane and was killed. And then later, Maria was killed. The way it is now, we're shown the effect and then its cause, but then are given no context to inform us that's what's happening. It's very amateur. I don't know why they did this.
Well, Gerald's death is depicted before Maria's because Maria's death was more painful for him. Obviously!
What? What? Huh? What even is that argument? Yes, both events were painful for Shadow. I won't dispute that. Both things were awful for him and affected him for a very long time. But I'm sorry. I flat out disagree with the notion that your adoptive sister / best friend dying during an act of self-sacrifice to save your life is more painful than having your father figure that you always looked up to going insane and brainwashing you into going along with the crusade to make everyone else feel the loss and despairs by blowing up the world and yourself against your own will. Has everyone forgotten the actual plot of Sonic Adventure 2? And I don't say that without reason, because Shadow Generations will go on to forget the plot of SA2 in many more ways than one, I might add. Shadow Gens also forgets everything from Shadow 05 too, but that's me getting ahead of myself. And the hypothetical is gone again. Okay. Anyway, some giant claws squash Shadow and he dies, and I can go home now and not waste the rest of my life thinking about this story ever again. Oh wait, this is a dream sequence, so he's fine. Okay. Has survivor's guilt and PTSD wishes that Maria and Gerald were not dead. And I feel like I can split these out. Reality land. And whenever any of these things happen, I could just move them down here. That won't happen. No siree. Chapter 5.
Breaking up, breaking out.
So, I'd like to comment on something that most of you will think is a pedantic nitpick. And let's be honest, it probably is. But why is Shadow here? In this part of nature, next to a tree? This isn't a plot hole or a narrative issue, at least as far as I'm aware. But I would expect some more intentionality as to why the story begins where it begins. Wait, hold on. Shadow of 5 began with Shadow walking through a... My goodness. Is that the reasoning behind him being here? Because the other Shadow thing also began with him in nature? Can you please come up with one original idea, Ian? Wait a second. That game also started with Shadow having visions of Maria's death. We are literally just repeating the beginning of Shadow 05 verbatim. What? Maybe Shadow just likes nature and the outdoors, and this vision just so happened to occur while he was frolicking? I guess that would make sense, I guess, with his personality, because Maria presumably used to talk about liking nature and stuff. But also, if my speculation is correct, then it's weird that Shadow instinctively accidentally destroys a tree with his chaos spear, and he just doesn't react at all. No seething or lamentation, just no reaction at all. So he's actually apathetic towards nature? Would you believe me if I said this is somehow the least of the problems with Shadow's characterization? We are now in the present day, and we know this because this helpful text tells us. Wait, hold on. I'm getting the distinct impression that whoever edited this episode doesn't know what words mean. This episode started with text establishing that we were on the Ark 50 years ago, but we weren't on the Ark. And it wasn't 50 years ago, because that's not how dreams work. We were always on Earth, and it was always the present day. At least as far as Sonic Cross Shadow Generations is concerned. So why is there this establishing text? This is what you would use on a flashback, not an unreliable nightmare fever dream. This is really confusing and bugging me. We just have no confidence in the audience's ability to intuit what's going on by themselves.
That was no mere nightmare, and it all began in view of the Ark. Could he have survived? No, that can't be. I need answers.
So, PTSD episode plus the Ark being in view equals somehow Black Doom return from being dead? Question mark?
What does that have to do with it?
No. He's got a point.
This would be like saying, I had a dream about the Earth exploding. Then I woke up and saw the school bus outside my window. Therefore, everyone will turn to bananas by the strike of noon. This isn't how deduction works, Ian. These two premises have nothing to do with the conclusion. You can't just skip how characters come to their conclusions and not allow. But sure, fine. Let's just accept this equation as if it makes a lick of sense. Now, in Shadow 05, it is established that Shadow was created with the blood of the Black Arms, and because of this, he is linked to their alien hive mind. And what I'm guessing is supposed to be going on is that Shadow knows whatever caused this vision is on the Ark, and is the work of some Black Arms adjacent threat because of his latent connection to said hive mind. But the problem is that this explanation is not in the episode when it easily could have been, and in spite of the fact that an attempt was made to exposit what Shadow thinks and is planning on pursuing. Why is this line like this? Just have him say something like, "This weight on my mind. I haven't felt this since." No, that can't be. I destroyed them. I need answers. I find it hilarious that this line exists to be pure exposition, and yet it completely fails to elaborate on the very thing it was meant to explain. Okay, we are done with episode 1. Yay. Likes nature, can lose control and accidentally destroy things he normally likes. Jumps to bizarre conclusions based on irrelevant info? Question mark? Gets to the bottom of things as soon as they are brought to his attention and sees them through. Takes high stakes scenarios and threats seriously. Yeah, I think that's it. Chapter 6.
Pause for effect.
For the uninitiated, in one of the many iconic scenes in Sonic Adventure 2, Eggman uses the power of the Eclipse Cannon to blow up the moon to show that he and his empire mean serious business. The moon is just decimated. Like, just look at this. This is a serious ramping up of the stakes here, and a very big change for the status quo. Like, imagine the effects on the Earth this would have with the stray debris falling toward the planet, tides going all screwy, and orbits becoming misaligned. This would be a keystone event for the history of this world. Everyone would know that the Eggman Empire blew up the moon, given you can't exactly ignore it. It's kind of an eyesore. And imagine if the final boss of a later game used the moon's crater as an arena. Wouldn't that have been awesome? Not that anyone involved in writing the stories for this franchise would even bother to notice, let alone capitalize on these potential opportunities for storytelling. Now, the only reason Shiro Mikawa, the writer of Sonic Adventure 2, was able to get away with such a change in the universe's stakes and destroy a constant fixture like this was because SA2 was made back when Sega wasn't doing so well, and everyone thought the franchise was probably going to end then and there if the worst came to pass. But the franchise didn't end then, now did it. And everyone tasked with continuing the series decided to not follow through on any of these ideas when making Heroes, and instead decided to pretend as if the moon never got blown up to begin with, even though it was like a major plot point. But to play devil's advocate, the only stage the moon appears in is in Hang Castle, and that place is haunted, and the moon there is clearly haunted. So maybe they aren't backtracking the shattered moon, and maybe that's the explanation. And then Shadow 05 literally opens with a shot of the intact moon. The moon is fine again. You see, it got better somehow. It's literally the first thing you see in a game that directly follows up on SA2. This had to have been intentional. They had to know exactly what they were doing. But why? Why would they do this? Did they forget? Are they stupid? Did they think we forgot? Did they think that we were stupid? The answer to all of these is no. The probably real answer is that they are just lazy. Creating assets for the shattered moon would take up valuable resources in the concept department every time the art style changes, or when a generational leap in hardware and graphics happens. And it would most likely require a unique asset for every instance that the moon appears in a cinematic or in a skybox. When the alternative is just to drag and drop NASA's billion K resolution scans of our moon into the project files, it's kinda easier to just not. But wait, said Tadashi Iizuka. We didn't forget the moon was shattered. The moon actually rotated, so the intact side faces the Earth. I don't know why I gave Tadashi Iizuka the Bernie Sanders accent. That was weird. You see, we actually thought this through beforehand, and I'm not just making this up on the spot to get everyone to shut up. Just trust me, bro. When he said this, he was rightfully mocked. You know, for all the wrong reasons. For some reason, everyone was stuck on the notion that our moon always faces the same direction toward Earth, while completely ignoring the fact that the digging a hole in the side of the moon would change the center of gravity, plus the impact from the laser would obviously cause the intact side to slowly rotate toward the Earth. I have no problem believing that that could happen over a substantial period of time. But there's just one problem, and that's the fact that everyone in charge refuses to let any of the characters age, so every present day event in the Sonic canon must take place within the span of little over a year. And then you have to account for a 6-month stretch of time where nothing of note can happen, meaning every event ever must take place within the surrounding margins, thus meaning that the moon would have had to have rotated to its new position in only a few days. And that would be very silly. But even if the moon rotating to its new position that quickly was realistic, it still wouldn't matter because, and I need to stress this, Iizuka was 100% talking out of his own butt to begin with, because we see the moon from space in both colors and generations, and the moon is completely intact despite us looking at it from not the Earth's surface. The Generations example is definitive because, if anything, we should be looking at the crater dead on, because that's how sightlines work. And the colors example is definitive because we see the moon's dark side in silhouette. And it's perfectly spherical when there should at least be a noticeable divot, because I stressed that the hole the Eclipse cannon made in the moon was very big. All of this is to say that when Dark Beginnings brought the shattered moon back, I jumped for joy. And I know that I should be able to see the moon from the Ark because they're basically right next to each other as seen in Dark Beginnings. So there is no reason why the moon shouldn't be in my line of sight when I'm on the Ark. Though it was weird that whenever the moon showed up in Sonic's campaign, it remained unaltered, which I find strange because they went out of their way to alter Shadow's air shoes to match their Shadow Gen's counterparts. Clearly they weren't unwilling to alter or overhaul assets for this remaster for the purposes of synergy. But then I played Shadow's campaign and the moon can't be seen in Act 1 of Space Colony Arc. Odd. Maybe I should keep looking in Act 2. Oh, the moon's attacked again. Great. So before anyone else gets pedantic, let me try to do that for you. In the Dark Beginning shot, we see the arc is facing the intact side of the moon, and in Space Colony Arc Act 2, there is a convenient structure blocking our entire view of it. So you could either argue that the shattered part is obscured by that convenient ledge, or that we wouldn't even be able to see the damage anyway because it's on the opposite side of the moon. But the Dark Beginnings moon design has all of these floating debris that we should be able to see regardless of those two aforementioned factors. Also, the entire point of bringing the shattered moon back was to be an act of goodwill. So it would be extremely dumb and counterproductive to weasel your own way out of showing it in the game. They could also weasel their way out by saying that They could also weasel their way out by saying that the white space displaced version of the arc, say that 5 times fast, is from a time before the moon exploded, even though the period it was taken from should have been from the same point in time as Shadow in the present. And every single stage that took place on the arc's exterior took place after the moon exploded. So why would this area be taken from a time before? Also, I lied about the moon only showing up in Space Colony Arc Act 2 because the moon also shows up center stage, completely intact in the Sonic rival sequence. Oh boy, that Sonic rival sequence, you're not ready for that. And the Shadow story recap ends on a triumphant post-Shadow 05 Shadow, standing in front of the intact moon. So screw it, I give up. You know, this is making me really wonder if the moon being shattered again is actually going to stick for the foreseeable future. Because until the shattered moon shows up in a fully fledged Sonic team project, I'm still in I'll believe it when I see it mode. So while it was nice to see the moon be shattered again, the fact that it got undone again after a hot minute rendered any and all goodwill that this gesture would have generated for me null and void, because the entire point of bringing back the shattered moon would be to make the continuity more consistent, and now it's objectively less consistent than it was before Dark Beginnings. If Ian and the lore team couldn't corral Sonic Team into cooperating with bringing the shattered moon back for good, then Dark Beginnings really shouldn't have bothered. Also, just as an aside, the size of the moon in Dark Beginnings is distractingly big, to the point that it becomes rather overwhelming. I'm guessing the intent was for the shot composition, but if the moon ever appears that big in the sky, it's probably because it fell out of orbit and it's about to crash into the Earth and flatten your location. Now, believe me or not, episode 1 was the good episode of Dark Beginnings. Yes, everything we went over was from the good episode. And that's simply because everything gets so much worse from here on out. Really, episode 1 simply is just laying down the foundations for the sea of terrible that is to come. Now, I'm going to address the fact that yes, it's been a while. This first part languished for longer than I would have liked because my plans for how I wanted to tackle Shadow Generations just kept changing. School got in the way. Unleashed Recompiled happened. I procrastinated. I got a couple of games that I wanted to play other than Sonic, other stuff. It was a mess. But I'm here now, and hopefully, by posting this video, I can light a fire under my butt and pump out the script for part 2 and edit it into a video in an expedient fashion, given that I'm still a one-man ship. But I knew that deep down, just like with Lightyear, I have to talk about this disaster. Ultimately, my opinions on Dark Beginnings changed so drastically that the original videos I made were just no longer accurate summations of my own thoughts. That's why I'm doing this again, so that my analysis of the whole storyline will be more consistent and flow better as one long essay. And unfortunately, because there are just so many things wrong with Dark Beginnings alone, it'll be a while before we tackle the game's narrative. Honestly, this entire Shadow Generations project is probably going to easily eclipse my 6 hours of rambling about Lightyear. But anyway, that is all for now. Till next time.